Inside the Poison Glass by Sean Platt and David Wright. Abatha's last chance at life waited on a distant island shore. She was headed there now, one of 2 passengers, on a private jet. The airplane was marvel of aeronautical engineering, its gleaming white exterior reflecting the boundless blue of the Pacific Ocean below. The interior, a cocoon of luxury. Buttery leather seats, gleaming wood accents. Even the air smelled expensive. The mysterious woman sitting across from Abatha had introduced herself only as Nadia. She looked up from her table, offered a reassuring smile. Abatha responded in kind, but she didn't feel it. Just a month ago, she had been a carefree 24-year-old with her entire life ahead of her. Then came the devastating diagnosis: glioblastoma. A viciously aggressive brain cancer. Incurable. Inescapable. Terminal. All the doctors told her the same exact thing. With treatment, she might have a year. Without? Weeks. Maybe a month. At first she'd cried, then she'd been angry, rage like she'd never felt in her life, all those goddamn visits to the doctor, complaining about headaches and strange visions, only to be told she was depressed. Hormonal. "Are you sure you're not pregnant?" But it hadn't been any of those things, had it? She'd screamed at her doctor when she finally got the results, was removed from the office by security for disturbing the patients. Abatha's fucking doctor had definitely disturbed her, only there were no consequences for his behaviour, his misdiagnosis. Fuck him. She declined all treatment. The less she had to spend her last remaining moments with doctors, the better. But then Nadia appeared. Abatha had no idea how the woman had found her. She assumed through the hospital. Scrolling medical records? Regardless, she came with a Faustian offer. Her employer, the brilliant but unorthodox Dr. Xavier Galbraith, had developed a series of trailblazing treatments for her particular cancer. He now ran a research facility on a private island in the Pacific Northwest, and he believed he could cure Abatha. Emphatically believed it, according to Nadia. His treatments had apparently helped multiple patients make full and complete recoveries that defied medical explanation. Of course, there was a catch. She would have to make a commitment. At least a month spent on the island while undergoing the experimental protocols. And Abatha wasn't allowed to tell anyone where she was really going, not even her family. Start to finish, the trip had to stay secret. That's when Abatha wavered. Because if the experiment didn't work, she'd most likely die. Which would mean she wouldn't get an opportunity to say goodbye to Dalton. He'd been her unwavering bestie since childhood. From skinned knees and elbows as kids to the death of his fiancée and her diagnosis as adults, they were always there for one another, no matter how rough life got. She'd told him where she was going, Pacific Northwest, and why. And while he wanted to argue, he also supported her desire to try anything in pursuit of her life. He'd driven her to the airport, but she kept her phone. And so he knew exactly where Abatha was. It wasn't anything new. They always each had others' location. At first for fun, then security. But Dalton refused to let her go unless he knew where she was. She promised to stay in touch. If she wasn't back by the end of the month, that would mean the treatment wasn't working, and he could come get her. More than anything, she wanted to spend her last moments with Dalton. Abatha felt the change in atmosphere. And then the jet started its descent toward a small forest-covered island. Thick trees pocked the sheer cliffs and rocky beaches. And there on the eastern-facing cliff was a stunning modern structure of steel and glass. It almost looked like a church. The plane circled around and she spotted what seemed to be an impossibly short runway. Abatha gripped the arms of her seat, closed her eyes, and within seconds the wheels touched tarmac. Sound rushed over her. She was convinced they would wind up in the sea. But then the plane stopped. Nadia tapped her knee. "We're here." Abatha opened her eyes and unclipped her belt. Then she stood, stretching her legs. She felt shaky. Tabitha hadn't moved. "You're not coming?" Nadia shook her head. "No, I have an appointment with another potential patient in Boston. Tabitha felt panic whirl into her throat. Nadia had been her touchstone, the reason she was here. She didn't want her to leave. Nadia reached forward and took her hand, giving it a squeeze. I'll be back before you leave. Because I know you will be healed. Okay? Abitha nodded. Thanks, Nadia. It didn't seem enough, but it seemed to suit Nadia just fine because she went back to scrolling her tablet. Abitha made her way out of the plane and down the stairs. Her suitcase was already waiting for her on the tarmac. She walked over to it, looking around, then spotted a tall, lean figure walking toward her. Even at this distance, Xavier Galbraith cut an imposing presence. Silver hair tickled his shoulders and his white lab coat seeming to glow in the cool sun. At least she assumed it was Galbraith. She grabbed her suitcase and pulled it behind her, walking toward him. Galbraith looked younger than Abitha had expected, early 50s or so. His ice-blue eyes met hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. But what was most odd was he held a tropical drink. Welcome, Abitha. A rich baritone, he extended his free hand. Nadia has told me so much about you. His grip was firm, confident, and clinical. That last part reassured her most of all. I trust the flight went well. She nodded. Then might I welcome you to my island? He held out the frosty cocktail. It was garnished with a bright yellow novelty umbrella. She took the glass. It was cold in her hand. A little sunshine in the face of life's storms, he said. Besides, we have a lot to celebrate. We do? He nodded. We are now partners in healing, and I guarantee that in 30 days you will be a brand new person. The cancer will be gone. And that is something to drink to, wouldn't you agree? She stared down at the glass. Abitha didn't normally accept drinks from strangers, but this was her doctor. Would you like me to take a sip first? I swear it's just a mix of pineapple and orange, maybe a hint of pear. No, she laughed. It's okay. And then she raised the stars to her mouth. It tasted exactly as he said. Abitha realized how thirsty she was. It was half gone within seconds. Let me take your suitcase, he said. She released her hold on it. Thanks, Dr. Galbraith. No. Xavier, please, come. Let me give you a tour of where we'll be partners in your healing. She expected to follow the same path he had walked down on, but instead they made their way to the bottom of the cliff where the facility stood. Then Xavier guided her into a glass elevator. Within seconds they were headed up. Moments later the doors opened. Abitha and Xavier exited into a large open lobby. It was all windows, with a view of only trees. Xavier left her suitcase next to the wall, then walked over to a door. This way. This was it. Once she walked through that door, her life would never be the same. She simply had to choose it. Xavier waited, watching her. She slurped down the last of her drink and followed him through. The inside of the lab was all glossy white surfaces and brushed steel. Monitors blinked and hummed while the panoramic windows offered a stunning view of the Pacific Ocean. It all seemed so foreign to Abitha. We're rather like a cross between a research facility and a luxury resort. Designed it myself. She followed him out of that room into a long hallway, making their way along it into another hub where 4 corridors stretched out in different directions. In addition to my laboratory, we have the infirmary, radiology suites and a genetic lab. Where's everyone else? Oh, it's just me. Abitha blinked. We're here alone. Not entirely. He grinned. Come. He led her over to a door marked with an M enclosed in a hexagon. I'd like you to meet Mother. He hit an electric switch on the wall and the doors slid open. Inside was a room that looked more like NASA mission control than any room Abitha had ever seen. Servers were stacked to the ceiling along every wall, a constellation of indicator lights blinking red, blue, and green. A feminine robotic figure turned to face them from her seat in the center, its faceplate a blank silver oval. "Hello, Xavier." Her voice was warm and maternal, its optic sensors fixed on Abitha. "And you must be my new daughter, Abitha. I have been looking forward to meeting you, my dear." Abitha shot a startled look at Xavier. He gave her a reassuring smile. "Mother is the AI system that runs this entire facility. She will be overseeing your care as well, an invaluable part of the team." "But she called me daughter." "Coding. Some patients found it hard to interact with an AI. So I found that the familial approach seemed to set them more at ease. Go on, shake her hand." Abitha reached and took Mother's extended metal fingers. "She's warm." He smiled. "Yes." "We're going to take such good care of you, Abitha," Mother said. "You'll feel like part of our family in no time." Then she pulled her hand away and turned back to her monitors. "Why don't I show you to your room?" Xavier asked. "Let you get settled, because tomorrow we begin your journey back to health." She followed him along to the lavishly appointed guest quarters where he left her. Somehow her suitcase was already in the room. She wondered if Xavier had lied about someone else being here. Or perhaps Mother had brought it. She poked around the room: bed, dresser, mini-fridge, bathroom with a shower and enormous marble tub, all the amenities of a 5-star hotel. Abitha opened her suitcase and unpacked, the magnitude of her decision slowly sinking in. Partners in healing. She sat on the bed, looking around the room, then pulled the framed photo of Dalton from her bag and studied his face. Covered in freckles, goofy grin, a missing tooth. While she had a bloody nose, they'd accidentally crashed their bikes into one another and thought it hilarious. So they captured the moment forever. She got up and placed the photo on the nightstand. Then she went and washed her face, brushed her teeth, got changed into her pajamas. The curtains were already drawn. She pulled one back to peek at the view. But there was no window. It was just a wall. She froze, then checked the other one and found the same thing. She darted over to the door, her hand resting on the knob. What if it didn't open? "Don't be stupid, it will open, you're not a prisoner." But there was only one way to find out. Abitha turned it. The door opened smoothly. She poked her head out into the hallway. It was empty. She closed and opened the door another 7 times, unsure of what she was trying to prove to herself. In the end, she closed it again, went and got the desk chair and set it in front. Even if Abitha was staying in a normal hotel, she would do the same thing. After that, she climbed into bed and glanced at the photo. "What have I gotten myself into, Dee? You better come find me if I get in over my head." She resisted the urge to get out her phone, mainly because she wasn't supposed to have it. Instead, she turned off the light, falling into a restless sleep, dreaming of silver robots with yellow umbrella fingers beckoning her deeper and deeper into a labyrinth of locked doors and secret labs, searching for an exit that did not exist. 2 weeks passed far quicker than Abitha would ever have anticipated. It didn't take much to settle into the rhythms of life on Xavier's island. Every day, he presented her with a cocktail, little yellow umbrella included. And then she was poked and prodded, and while Xavier might have said they were the only 2 on the island, it wasn't exactly true. Because in addition to Mother, there was a team of eerily lifelike robots that lived her as well, each one monitoring a different aspect of her fragile condition. But Mother was at the centre of it all. For an artificial intelligence, she had an impeccable bedside manner, seeming to anticipate Abitha's every need before she was even aware of it herself. From bringing her a soothing cup of tea just before a wave of nausea hit, or dimming the lights as soon as a headache began to pulse behind her eyes. Abitha found herself growing strangely accustomed to Mother's constant presence. She was certainly far more attentive than Abitha's own mother. Soon even, the sterile examination rooms began to feel cosy. She even looked forward to their daily girl talk sessions, where Mother would ask gentle questions about Abitha's life back home, wanting to understand her hopes and dreams. But there was still no surgery, or medicine, which started to confuse Abitha. Weren't they wasting time? How much longer might Xavier take to get started? She didn't want to ask him outright. Somehow it seemed rude. So she asked Mother instead. "What do you mean get started?" Mother asked. "The process has begun." Abatha stared at the robot. "When?" "Oh, my dear," Mother said. "Your drink." Abatha looked down at the orange and pineapple and pear concoction with its little yellow umbrella. "This is it?" Mother nodded. "Especially formulated for your body." It hardly seemed possible. There was no medication in it, or if there was, Abatha couldn't detect it. But then why had Xavier assured her it was undoctored that first day? Maybe that one had been. But it did seem odd for him not to have told her. The next time she went for her morning tests, he presented a sheepish smile. "Mother tells me I forgot to tell you about the elixir." Abatha nodded. "I'd forget my own head if it weren't fastened on. My apologizes. The medication is designed to shrink the tumour, and so far it appears to be working." "But I don't taste anything other than the fruit." "Excellent," he beamed. "You don't want to know how many versions it took me to eliminate the chemical taste." After that, Abatha supposed she felt reassured. At least the doctor was doing something, and she didn't mind the daily tests. At least they gave her something to do. She was otherwise left to herself. There was no Wi-Fi or data, so she couldn't scroll the phone she wasn't supposed to have. So Abatha often she explored the island, small as it was. By now it seemed as though she knew every beach, tree, rock and seashell. Some days she would sit on the shore watching the water for hours. Or was it seconds? She couldn't tell. Because something strange was happening with time. She reluctant to tell Xavier. Maybe because she felt like it might be the cancer. "What is it?" Mother asked. "I feel like I'm losing time, like my mind is slipping gears. One minute I feel like I just arrived, and the next it's like I've been on this island for years." "That's not entirely unexpected," Mother said, her tone remaining serenely modulated while she made a note on her tablet. "Mild temporal dysphoria can be a side effect of some neuroregenerative components in your treatment protocol." "Maybe, but there were other things happening as well." She could hear rustles of noise from all the way across the sprawling complex, as though the source was mere inches away. And when looking at the gleaming white walls, Abatha swore she could see the individual carbon molecules dancing in their lattice structures. "It's not just that. Everything feels off." She should have known better than to confide in Mother by now, because the robot obviously informed Xavier yet again. "We're on the bleeding edge of human innovation here," Xavier said the next morning. They were seated outside on the patio, playing a game of chess. Above them, the sky was a cool blue, and it merged with the sea in what almost resembled a watercolour painting. "The elixir is rebuilding you on a quantum level, an unprecedented form of healing. Some strangeness is to be expected." His long fingers danced across the ebony and ivory pieces, moving a bishop into a feinting offensive. Abatha stared at the board, patterns and probabilities unfurling like fractal flowers in her mind, until the perfect counter-move crystallized. Within seconds, she'd knocked over his queen. "You said you've only played chess twice." Abatha nodded, casually with her father as a child on both occasions. Yet here she was, outmaneuvering a grandmaster like Xavier. He sat back, eyebrows climbing toward his silver hairline. "Fascinating." She laughed, feeling a bit like a lab experiment. "What did you want to be when you grew up?" he asked. She was startled by the abrupt change in conversation and by the sudden tears that moistened her eyes. "Fashion. I love texture and fabrics and weaving together disparate elements of colour and pattern that shouldn't fit, but somehow figuring out how they can." She was silent a moment, looking out at the thick pine trees. "I was halfway through my degree when I got the diagnoses." She dropped out mid-term without telling a soul. "You'll get to finish your degree, and I guarantee you'll go on to change the world." Abatha sniffed. "You keep saying that you guarantee it, but you don't really know, do you?" You doubt? He asked. She shrugged. You say the treatment is working, but how can you trust me, after all those other doctors failed you? She nodded. You can't. She stiffened. Hadn't been expecting Xavier to say that. No. So the only way to know for sure is to see it through regardless of the side effects, wouldn't you say? I guess so, she said. He stood his queen up, gestured to the board. Now, what do you say to another game? You're going to lose, she said, her brain already picking out a strategy based on his previous game. Then she smiled. I guarantee it. He laughed. Game on. Not all the changes to Abitha's body were so benign. With her perceptions cranked up to an excruciating degree, she was aware of even the tiniest details in her environment. The problem was Xavier's compound was starting to feel suffocating, and she couldn't tell if that was her own paranoia, being so far away from home and Dalton, or the truth. She still had her phone and had of course thought to contact him. But it was dead and her charger had gone missing. She couldn't remember if she'd misplaced or hidden it. Maybe Mother had confiscated it for some reason she couldn't very well ask, because Abitha wasn't supposed to have it in the first place. So she brought it up at their next chess game. It's the lack of sleep, Xavier said, pushing a pawn along the board. Abitha wrinkled her nose. But I feel like I've been sleeping fine. That's not what you said yesterday. She blinked, confused. No? He shook his head. She thought about yesterday. Stepping off the plane, him handing her the yellow umbrella. But that wasn't yesterday, was it? Surely she had been here longer. Abitha! She looked at her doctor. He gestured to the board, then moved one of her pawns. An eagle screamed. She looked up, watching it circle, then dived toward the water, heard Xavier's chair shift. Thanks for the game, I need to get back to the lab. But we've just started, Abitha said. But they hadn't. The board was almost clear. Her queen had triumphed. Only because you beat me. He laughed. She watched him leave. Then examined the board. Had he tricked her somehow? Or was her sense of time that confused? Perhaps she could ask Mother. There was only one problem. Abitha no longer trusted the robot, or any of them. The robotic orderlies followed her every move, and now it felt less like dutiful concern and more like the bleak vigilance of prison guards. Even Mother's gentle questions began to take on the tone of an interrogation, and any information she gleaned would invariably get back to Xavier. She decided to stop playing chess. He was obviously using the game as yet another one of his laboratory tests, and she was tired of feeling under the microscope, even though that was her sole purpose in being here. Abitha hadn't trusted her other doctors, so why did she trust him? Maybe there was something in the elixir, like a truth serum. Only it was a trust serum. He was hiding something behind that preternatural silver hair and ice chip eyes. She could stay and find out. Or... I want to go home, she said. Mother was still. Did you hear me? Abitha asked. Of course, daughter, I am standing right beside you. So can I? This is not a prison. Abitha flushed. I didn't say it was. You insinuated. Was that a tone to the robot's voice? But first I must verify some information. And then I can leave? Abitha asked. Of course, daughter. All right then. Leaving prior to the 30-day window will result in your death. You accept this consequence? Abitha blinked. I haven't been here for 30 days. No. How long have I been here? I cannot answer that question, Mother said. Abitha almost stamped her foot like a child. Why not? I do not track time the same way humans do. You will need to check with Xavier. Abitha clenched her fists. That seemed ridiculous. Mother surely knew her date of arrival, and could subtract from whatever today was. So, Mother asked, you are prepared to die? Death. That was the consequence of giving in to her paranoia. Her head hurt. Why did that have to be the choice? Stay here and live, go home and die. Abitha? She ignored Mother, walking off and returning to her room. She climbed into bed and pulled the covers over her head. It didn't matter that this place was designed to save her life. She was beginning to hate it. It did feel like a prison. Why wasn't she allowed to have a phone? To keep in touch with family and friends? Xavier had said it was because of corporate spies and how proprietary his treatment was. But what if that was all a lie? What if he wasn't even healing her? She sat up, sweating. What if something else was going on? She'd heard stories about women being held captive by men before. Her heart beat fast, and she had to swallow several times to keep it from climbing up and out of her throat. And then she gave her head a shake. Those stories usually involved abuse of some kind, and nothing like that had happened here. Xavier never even gave her a hint of impropriety. Mostly because she never saw him. After he delivered her morning elixir, she joined him in the lab for tests. Then they played a game of chess, and she never saw him the rest of the day. At least Abitha didn't think she did. She always ate lunch alone, walked the island, dined solo, and went to bed. So where was he? Sometimes she'd stop by his lab, only to find he wasn't there either. There were plenty of other closed doors, places that she wasn't forbidden to enter, at least she didn't think so. But she'd never been inside. But he was hiding something, she was sure of it. And tonight she was going to find out. She was going to open each and every door and find out just where the good doctor disappeared to when he wasn't saving her life. She waited until it was dark. Then Abitha slipped out of bed and entered the corridor. The robots were quiet. Recharging, maybe. She found one hooked up to a port in the lobby. She made her way through the door to Xavier's lab, poking through cupboards and drawers, but nothing seemed out of place, so she continued on. Where hadn't she been? Radiology. She started there. But once again it seemed ordinary enough. If you considered a state-of-the-art radiology suite on a remote island in the Pacific Northwest to be normal, perhaps a tad new. Had anyone ever used it? Maybe it was just that there were so few patients it seemed so untouched, but the bed was still shrouded in plastic wrap. She moved on, heading toward the infirmary. Like her bedroom, there were no windows here, and Abitha felt like she was moving deeper into the fortress. Fortress. Now, why had she called it that? She opened a door at the far end of the room, not sure what she expected. A supply closest, maybe, but it revealed stairs leading down to where the air was cool. Her skin prickled. Why was there a hidden staircase? And what was done down there? She waited a moment, maybe expecting Mother or Xavier to leap out and chastise her. Neither did. So she took the first stair, then the second, too scared to close the door. She made her way down, and further down. A twisting metal staircase descending into the bedrock. She stopped halfway down, knowing she shouldn't be here. But then why had the door been unlocked? Go back! She felt drawn forward, like caught in a tractor beam. At the bottom was a corridor, and a door, R&D written in large letters. Her heart thudded. This had to be another of Xavier's labs. So was the one upstairs just for show? A round button sat on the wall. She hit it. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Abitha stepped inside, then the door sealed again with a whisper and a click. There was a similar button on the inside. But she didn't test the door because her eyes were caught by the rows of cool blue containment cylinders. Dozens lined the walls, frosted glass occluding their contents like the ice-rimed windows of an abattoir meat locker. The room was lit only by the glow of status lights winking from the computers each was hooked up to. Abitha walked over to the nearest cylinder and wiped a palm across the glass. A perfectly preserved woman's face stared back at her from the other side. She had a waxy, almost translucent quality to her skin. Abitha stepped back. What the hell? She walked to the next one, and the next, all the way down the aisle, clearing viewports one by one, men, women, even young children, all suspended in slumber, all wearing the faces of Xavier's army of androids. She arrived at the final cylinder. Her hand trembled when she reached to wipe away the condensation. but the door hissed open behind her. Abatha spun around. Xavier stepped into the eerie blue glow. She retreated, her back striking the wall, because there was nowhere to go. "Don't touch me." He raised his hands in supplication. "It's not what it looks like. Please, let me explain." Abatha inched further away. "These bodies are not what they appear." He gestured to a padded bench next to the wall. She only walked to it when he made his way to the other side of the room to one of the computers. Xavier turned his back to her, and a few deft keystrokes later, a holoprojection flickered to life. She sat, staring at it, watching as ghostly blue figures took shape, perfect replicas of the bodies floating in the tanks. "Clones," Xavier said, turning back to her. "Grown from scratch in our state-of-the-art 3D bioprinters. Blank slates upon which I can test it and refine the neuro-regenerative elixir that you take, without any risk to living patients." He zoomed in on one of the spinning holoclones, revealing an intricate web of veins and nerves, the delicate tracery of brain tissue. "Miracles require iteration, trial, and error, but I recoiled at testing on live animals or humans, so I made my own. They're not real." "Well, they are made of biomatter, but do they have a soul? No. Can they think, feel, emote? Also no. They are simply human mass held inside a human-like vessel." He clicked through to another hologram, of himself working in the lab, a blob of something that looked like brain in a glass container. "When I first started, I only cloned brains, but it was too abstract. I found myself disconnected. I needed to know I was helping people, see how the changes manifested in the body. So I came up with the idea of clones. Unconventional, I know." The door opened again. "Nadia." She eyed them both, her mouth breaking into a smile at the sight of them. "Abatha." Abatha bolted to her feet. "Nadia." She raced over to Nadia, skirting around the doctor. Nadia enveloped her in a warm hug. "Don't tell me you decided to show her the clones, Xavier. How grisly." "She found them," he said. Nadia drew the hair back from Abatha's eyes. "I've told him to put a bloody lock on the door. I'm sorry if you were frightened." She glanced over at Xavier. "I'm putting Abatha to bed because she looks exhausted. Then you and I are going to have a conversation about patient well-being." Xavier grumbled something under his breath. Nadia drew Abatha out of the room. They didn't go to the stairs, but instead to an elevator at the opposite end of the hall. "I'm sorry about that, Abatha," she said once they were in the elevator. "It's all right. It's better now that you're here. Are you staying long?" "I'm leaving in the morning." Abatha felt a stab of disappointment. "So soon?" Nadia laughed. "I've been here all week." Abatha stared at her. "You have?" "We had breakfast yesterday." Abatha paled. "Why don't I remember?" Nadia bent down and looked her in the eyes. "It's the elixir. Gets time muddled. Reality confused. It's all a normal part of the process." "Normal?" "If all of that is happening to you, it means your brain is healing, okay?" Abatha nodded, but it didn't feel normal. She returned to her room and climbed into bed. Nadia tucked her in and turned out the light. But Abatha didn't sleep. She didn't want to. Where the hell had Nadia come from? Abatha knew that she hadn't been there all week, and they hadn't eaten breakfast together. So why was she lying? Why had she returned? Because there was something in that room she and Xavier hadn't wanted Abatha to see. She flung the covers off, then pulled them back. Being reckless wasn't going to get her answers. She stuck her hand under her pillow, searching for her phone. But it wasn't there. She scrambled out, searching the entire bed, gone, as was the framed photo of her and Dylan. White-hot rage spiked through her. And she knew with certainty that if she asked about them, she'd be told they were never here. She forced herself into bed. Not that she slept. She kept thinking of the room. What had she missed? The day passed excruciatingly slowly, and she was in a foul mood. "Abatha." Xavier sounded concerned when finishing with her daily pokes and prods. She hadn't said a single word to him. She hadn't heard the plane take off and wondered if Nadia was still around, but then she hadn't heard it land yesterday either. "No sleep," she said. Ah, as though that explained everything. "Chess? Not today." She shook her head. "I want to get some air." And she did. But when she headed out the front doors, she turned right instead, going down to rocky shore where the glass elevator was located, making her way through the forest floor to search for a thick branch. She found one, stripping off the leaves and twigs. Then she hefted it like a bat. If Xavier tried to stop her, this would do the trick. She entered the elevator and punched the button labelled R down into the basement. She stood for a moment, waiting. But no alarms went off. None of Xavier's robot companions appeared to arrest her. She walked down to the hydraulic door and entered. The room was the same. She surveyed the cylinders, then walked along the row, all the way to the back. Stopping before last cylindrical tank, the one she had been about to investigate when Victor entered the lab. She ran her palm over the glass and peered inside. It was Abatha, a perfect copy of her, waiting. Understanding crashed over like a cold wave. The clones, the elixir, the promise of a cure, all breadcrumbs leading to this. Bait for the trap, and she'd waltzed right into it. Xavier wasn't healing people, he was replacing them. She clutched the branch to her chest. The door hissed behind her. Xavier paled. "Abatha, please, it's not what you think." "You already said that!" Abatha screamed. "You don't get to say it again!" White-hot rage exploded behind her eyes. Xavier had lied to her, betrayed her, used her. "What is this?" His eyes looked sad. "You know what is it." She licked her lips, stepping toward him and raising the branch. At least he had the decency to cower. "What's in the elixir?" "Abatha, tell me!" He held up his hands. "We're preparing your DNA." Preparing. For what? She didn't know why she asked. He'd been stringing her cells along like marionettes because he wanted to replicate her DNA and make that clone. Something in that drink paved the way. "Abatha, please." She didn't want to hear another goddamn thing out of his mouth. She lunged at him and struck. The branch broke on his skull. For a moment he looked surprised. "Now just a min—" And then he collapsed with a meaty thud, limbs splayed at unnatural angles like a discarded rag doll. That once brilliant light behind his eyes extinguished in a blink. Blood pooled onto the floor, staining the sterile white tiles. She dropped what was left of the branch, prodded his shoulder with her foot, but he didn't move. Oh God, what had she done? "Abatha!" Mother's voice filled the room. "What has happened to Xavier? I'm sending help now." Panic clawed at her chest and she bolted. Heading for the glass elevator, she ran inside, hit the button for the beach. "Abatha, Abatha, Abatha!" Mother's voice repeated like a corrupted file. Abatha burst out as the doors opened. It was storming. Had it been this inclement earlier? She couldn't remember. She staggered across the stones toward the water, rain pelting her face. The ocean stretched before her, the waves angry. She had no idea where the mainland was, but it had to be close. She could swim for it. Abatha kicked off her shoes and ran into the water. The cold undertow threatened to drag her down and she had to fight to keep her balance. Salt spray stung her eyes and hot tears streaked down her cheeks. And then she stopped. She couldn't do this. Swim for God knew how many miles in this tempest. But what other choice did she have? Was drowning preferable to a murder charge? A wail tore from her chest. She'd come here for life. But death was all that waited. It was all that ever waited. She had been a fool to try for something else. "Dalton!" She screamed his name, but it was lost to the wind. How come he hadn't come like she asked? Had he forgotten her? Or maybe he just didn't care. "Abatha, wait!" Xavier's voice pierced the howling wind, impossibly close. She spun around, nearly losing her footing on slippery seaweed. He stood at the water's edge, rain plastering his hair to his skull, white lab coat almost translucent. There was no sign of the blood, no trace of the wound she had inflicted. "What?" she croaked, her voice nearly lost amid the crashing waves. "You're one of them!" "I am," Xavier said, picking his way carefully across the rocks toward her. "One of Mother's fail-safes, in case of misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings? Stay the fuck away from me." She backed further into the surf. "I won't let you put me in one of those things." "Oh, Abatha." His eyes were sad, the rain turning into tears on his face. "We would never force this on you. But you must understand, the cancer had already progressed beyond the reach of any conventional treatment by the time you arrived. Without intervention, your body will fail within days, maybe less." He extended a hand. "So that's it then." Her lips felt numb, the words hollow, and she was freezing. Already couldn't feel her toes. "I come back and let you scoop out my brain and put it into a clone, or I swim for shore. And if I don't die trying, I will in hospital. Or, she asked, you get to live as a wind-up doll dancing to your—" Xavier recoiled. "Good God, no, never." Abatha blinked. "What?" Something silver flashed on shore behind Xavier. Abatha peered around him. It was Mother. "The existence I offer you is not a cage, but wings. Once you leave here, you are free to live your life. You never ever have to return. You will have complete freedom, even from the frailties and failings of biology." Mother walked into the water, passing Xavier and stopping before Abatha. Then she reached out. Abatha jerked back, but Mother merely cupped Abatha's face with a cool chrome hand. "You need not ever age, or grow sick, experience fatigue, or death. In the bosom of my love, you will live an eternity." "Does it hurt?" She immediately wanted to withdraw the question. Why bother asking when she wasn't going to accept? "The process is entirely safe, Abatha. We've ensured there is no loss of continuity or diminishing of self. If anything, our patients are more themselves than ever, unencumbered by physical needs and limitations." That's right. There were others. She wasn't the first. "And the ones who refused?" Abatha asked. "The ones who chose death?" Mother gestured to the forest behind her. Buried beneath the trees with love. They felt no pain in their final days. Mourned them as we would any lost child. Just as we would you, if you choose that end. Abatha closed her eyes, hot tears squeezing past her lashes. She thought of Dalton and the life she had hoped to lead, the future she had been dreaming of since childhood. Her life would end here if she said no, on this island. "Oh, my child," Mother said, wiping her tears. "Life awaits if you choose it, full of wonders beyond your wildest imaginings." "I do," Abatha said, opening her eyes, choking on her cries. "I do choose life." Mother's face remained blank, but Abatha knew she was smiling. "Come, let's get you warm." Abatha allowed herself to be escorted back into the facility. Over to the bed where she had so many tests. Only another bed was there now. It held her clone. Silent. Still. An empty vessel. Fear bubbled upside her. "I can't," Abatha said. "What are you afraid of, daughter?" Abatha squeezed her hands into fists. What was she afraid of? The chance to live again. If this didn't work, she was dead anyway. And then she realized she was always afraid of everything, of telling Dalton she loved him, of continuing on with her degree despite the diagnosis, of this, now. The only brave thing she'd ever done was agree to come here. "You didn't answer my question," she said. "Which one is that?" Xavier asked. "Does it hurt?" "Only for a moment," Mother told her. "And then you will be free." Abatha nodded, then climbed onto the bed and lay down. One of the robots brought a blanket. It was warm, made her sleepy. And then Mother inserted the IV. Wait! But it was too late. Darkness swallowed her whole. Dalton arrived at the island 2 weeks later. He'd had to hire a boat, but Abatha had said 30 days, and it was now 32, so here he was, hoping he wasn't about to get shot for trespassing. He pulled the motorboat ashore, then picked his way up the beach toward the glass building he had seen from the water. What the fuck was he going to say? I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. Jesus. He'd almost reached the front doors when a figure emerged. He stopped, then stared. Was that Abatha? She smiled. Dalton! He ran toward her. She held a tropical drink in one hand, but he didn't care. He pulled her into a hug. She embraced him back. Careful, you'll spill my drink. He laughed, stepped back. You look healthy. But it was more than that. Her face was the same, but somehow it looked almost airbrushed, not a blemish or freckle to be seen. And her eyes, once a warm, humorous brown, now seemed like mirrors that swallowed the light. Amazing. He flushed, wincing. I take it the experiment worked? It did. Now, she held out the glass. Condensation beaded the sides and glittered in the sun. A yellow umbrella was speared through one of the lone ice cubes. Drink. We're celebrating your arrival. He raised the straw to his lips and sipped. Why's that? She kissed his cheek. Because I'm going to have a very long life, and I want you to be at my side forever. Warmth blossomed through him. Then he smiled and downed the rest of the drink. Sounds good to me.